The attic smelled of dust and forgotten time, the air thick with the weight of memories long buried. Alina and Anaya, identical in features but starkly different in nature, stood side by side, sifting through faded photo albums, antique trinkets, and boxes sealed with brittle tape. Their grandmother had passed weeks ago, and they had promised their mother they would finally clear out the attic, though neither of them had been eager to do so. Alina, the impulsive and adventurous twin, grabbed a heavy wooden chest covered in cobwebs and tried to pry it open. Anaya, ever the cautious one, shot her a wary glance. "Shouldn't we ask Mom first?" she asked, but Alina was already pulling at the rusted lock. With one final tug, it popped open, revealing an assortment of aged letters, a delicate silver locket, and a small, unassuming box labeled Ancestry Journey. Alina held it up, intrigued. "A DNA kit? Do you think Grandma wanted to take a test?" she mused, brushing off the dust. Anaya peered over her shoulder, frowning. She never mentioned it, and it doesn't look like she ever used it. The sealed vials inside were untouched, the instruction sheet still neatly folded. "Well," Alina smirked, already tearing open the plastic, "maybe we can finish what she started." Anaya hesitated. "I don't know, Alina. What if— come on, don't be such a downer," Alina interrupted. "What's the worst that could happen? We find out we're secretly related to royalty?" She swabbed the inside of her cheek, grinning mischievously while Anaya sighed, reluctantly following suit. The tests were mailed out that same afternoon, and neither of them thought much of it afterward. What harm could a simple DNA test do? But deep in the recesses of the attic, beneath the floorboards warped with age, something else lurked. Something neither of them had discovered yet. An old, faded newspaper clipping, yellowed with time, was tucked between the pages of a forgotten journal. Its bold, eerie headline read, "Missing infant twins vanish from hospital. Parents murdered in ritualistic killing." The attic, silent as ever, kept its secrets well. But soon the past would come crashing into the present, and the sisters' lives would never be the same again. 2 weeks passed in a blur of school, late-night conversations, and the mundanity of everyday life. The DNA test had become an afterthought, a fleeting moment of curiosity, tucked away in the recesses of their minds. That is, until the email arrived. Alina was the first to see it, lounging on the couch as she scrolled through her phone. A notification pinged on her screen. "Your DNA results are ready. View now." "Hey, Anaya!" "Our results came in," she called out excitedly, sitting up. Anaya, ever the careful one, walked over, peering at the screen. "Finally," she muttered, more hesitant than eager. The anticipation was mild at first, but as they clicked on the link, an unexpected alert made their breath hitch. "Significant findings detected. Immediate consultation recommended." "What the hell does that mean?" Alina asked, brows furrowed. Anaya's stomach churned with unease. "It could be a health marker or something. Or maybe something about our ancestry?" "Yeah, well, that something just made my skin crawl," Alina muttered. Deciding not to jump to conclusions, they called their mother, who was in the kitchen preparing a pot of herbal tea, the fragrance of cardamom and cloves drifting through the air. The moment she saw the alert on the screen, the mug in her hand clattered against the counter, spilling tea across the wooden surface. Her reaction was immediate, visceral. "We need to see Dr. Caldwell," she said, her voice strained. Alina and Anaya exchanged wary glances. "Mom, what's wrong?" Anaya pressed, heart pounding. Their mother took a deep breath, but the mask of calm she tried to wear was already cracking. "Let's just get clarification before assuming anything." But there was something in her voice, something buried deep in the timbre of her words. Fear. The next morning, the three of them sat in the sterile waiting room of Dr. Caldwell's clinic. The sharp scent of disinfectant mixed with the murmurs of hushed conversations. Alina tapped her foot impatiently while Anaya clenched her hands together, cold fingers laced in anxious anticipation. Their mother sat in silence, staring ahead, gripping her purse as though it anchored her in reality. When their names were finally called, they were ushered into Dr. Caldwell's office, a room lined with books on genetics, anthropology, and hereditary diseases. The doctor, a middle-aged man with gentle but calculated movements, greeted them with his usual warmth, only to have it fade as he opened their file. His fingers froze on the page. His eyes darkened, lips parting slightly, but no words came. The air felt heavier. Time slowed. "What is it?" their mother asked, leaning forward in her chair. Dr. Caldwell swallowed hard. I need to review this thoroughly before I say anything." His fingers twitched against the file. "Please excuse me for a moment." Before anyone could protest, he left the room, the door clicking shut behind him. Silence stretched. The ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner became deafening, a cruel countdown to something they couldn't yet understand. "Mom," Anaya whispered, "do you know something about this?" Their mother exhaled shakily, but before she could speak, the door swung open again. This time, Dr. Caldwell was not alone. Two police officers entered behind him, their faces unreadable, their uniforms crisp and formal. "Alina and Anaya," one of them said, his voice steady but serious. "We're going to need you to come with us." The room tilted. "What?" Their mother shot up, stepping in front of them protectively. "They're just kids. What is this about?" Dr. Caldwell sighed, rubbing his temples as if the weight of his discovery pained him. "Ma'am, please, we don't want to alarm you," he said, his voice softer now. "But their DNA results contain evidence that is legally significant." "Legally significant," Alina echoed, a chill running down her spine. The officer's tone remained grave. "Their DNA has matched evidence from a criminal investigation, one that has been unsolved for almost 2 decades. The world lurched beneath their feet. Their mother gasped, her face draining of color. "That's impossible." "Ma'am," the other officer interjected gently, "we're not saying your daughter's committed a crime." He hesitated before adding, "But their DNA is linked to a crime scene, and we need to understand how." Alina felt her breath falter. "A crime scene?" she whispered. "What kind of crime?" The officer's eyes flickered toward Dr. Caldwell, who nodded gravely. "An abduction," the officer finally admitted. 16 years ago, a set of newborn twins disappeared without a trace. Their parents were murdered the same night. Anaya's hands turned to ice. Her voice cracked as she stammered, But we were just babies 16 years ago?" The officer nodded solemnly. "Yes, and that's why this is unusual, because the DNA match suggests that you two were the infants that went missing that night." The room seemed to buckle. The ride to the police station was wrapped in an unsettling silence, broken only by the rhythmic hum of tires against the pavement. Alina sat rigidly, her fists clenched on her lap, while Anaya kept her gaze fixed on the blur of city lights outside the car window as though hoping to find some semblance of reality beyond the chaos unfolding around them. Their mother sat between them, her knuckles white from gripping their hands. She hadn't said a word since they had left the clinic. The police station was sterile, the fluorescent lights overhead flickering faintly, casting a cold glow against the gray walls. A desk sergeant barely spared them a glance as Detective Pierce, a tall man with silver streaks in his dark hair, led them down a quiet corridor. His footsteps echoed, filling the space with a sense of foreboding. Inside the small interrogation room, the atmosphere was suffocating. The walls, devoid of warmth, were lined with old case files and a whiteboard covered in scribbled notes. A single manila folder lay in the center of the metal table. Detective Pierce gestured for them to sit. "I know this is overwhelming," he began, his voice measured yet firm. "But I need you to listen carefully. The information in this folder—" He hesitated, then slid the file toward them. "It will change everything you think you know." Anaya reached for it first, her fingers trembling as she flipped it open. What she saw sent a chill straight to her core. Inside were 2 birth certificates, neither carrying their mother's name. Instead, under Mother Unknown, a different name was scrawled in faded ink under Father, a name neither of them recognized. But Detective Pierce did. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his chin before meeting their confused gazes. This man, he was our primary suspect in a case that's haunted me for 16 years. His voice grew quieter, heavier. Your biological father was not an ordinary man. He was a wanted fugitive, a known associate of an underground organization that operated in trafficking. Alina recoiled. What? Their mother finally spoke, her voice shaking. No, that can't be true. There has to be some mistake. There is no mistake. Pierce's tone hardened. Your grandmother, she took you in after he vanished. And based on what we've uncovered, it wasn't by coincidence. The words lingered in the air like poison. Anaya felt her stomach churn. So, what are you saying? Pierce slid another photo toward them, a grainy black and white image of a younger version of their grandmother, standing next to a man in a long coat. His face was partially shadowed, but there was something unmistakably unsettling about him. She was protecting you, Pierce said carefully. From him. The room seemed to shrink, pressing in on them with the weight of what he was implying. Their mother's voice cracked. No, she wouldn't have. She knew, Pierce interjected, his eyes sharp. She knew exactly who he was, and she knew exactly why he left you behind. Alina shook her head, refusing to believe it. Number. If she was protecting us, why didn't she tell us? Why keep it a secret? Pierce leaned forward. Because the kind of people he was involved with, they don't just disappear. His voice lowered. And if they ever found out you were still alive, they would come for you. The words hung heavy and unforgiving, an omen of something far worse lurking just beyond the horizon. Anaya's heart pounded. She had always believed that the world was built on order, that the people who raised you were inherently good, that safety was something guaranteed. But now, everything had turned upside down. Her voice barely came out above a whisper. Where is he now? Pierce exhaled slowly. We don't know. He disappeared 16 years ago. But this case, he tapped the birth certificates, has just reignited the investigation. And I have reason to believe that someone else does know where he is. Alina frowned. Who? Pierce hesitated before answering. Your grandmother. An eerie silence fell over the room. The walls of certainty around them were crumbling faster than they could grasp. But she's dead, Anaya pointed out, her voice unsteady. Yes, Pierce acknowledged. But her journals aren't. A chill skittered down Alina's spine. She thought back to the old leather-bound books they had found in the attic, the ones their grandmother had never let them read. Anaya turned to their mother. You have to let us read them. No, their mother whispered immediately. Anaya's gaze hardened. Mom, if we are in danger, we deserve to know why. A painful silence stretched between them. Their mother looked at them, her eyes glassy with fear and hesitation. Those journals. They hold things that should never be spoken aloud. Then why was she so afraid of them? Alina shot back. Pierce observed their mother carefully. You've read them, haven't you? Her throat bobbed as if swallowing a bitter truth. Only once. And? She squeezed her eyes. The drive back home was thick with a suffocating silence. A vacuum where questions twisted and stretched, warping into something grotesque. The weight of what had been revealed at the station sat heavy in their chests, pressing against their ribs like an iron fist. Alina and Anaya were no longer who they thought they were. Their identities were borrowed, their past stolen, their existence a question without an answer. Their mother sat stiffly in the driver's seat, her grip tight on the steering wheel. Her knuckles were ghostly white, her lips pressed together in an unspoken war of emotions. She had spent her entire life believing in one truth, only to have it ripped apart in a single evening. The twins were still trying to process what Detective Pierce had said. Their grandmother had known everything. She had lied. She had stolen them from a life they were never meant to escape. And worse, someone out there still knew they existed. The house was eerily quiet when they arrived, the walls seeming to breathe with the weight of the memories they contained. The journals. That was where the next piece of the puzzle lay. Without hesitation, the twins marched up to the attic, their mother trailing behind them with weak protests. "You don't understand what's in there," she whispered hoarsely, her voice thick with dread. Alina turned, her eyes blazing. "Then help us understand." With slow, hesitant movements, their mother crossed the attic's threshold, the air stale with dust and forgotten history. She reached for the wooden box, the same one they had opened weeks ago, unknowingly unleashing a storm. As they flipped through the pages, the journals began revealing something far worse than they had imagined. The sinister entries, a web of deception. The handwriting was delicate but firm, each word a whisper from the past. At first, the entries were simple, notes about their grandmother's daily life, recipes, and conversations with neighbors. Then the shift came. Anaya's fingers trembled as she read aloud. "He came again last night. Said it was time. I told him no. Told him I wouldn't give them up. He says they were never mine to keep." Alina's breath caught. "Them," she repeated in a hollow whisper. "She's talking about us." Her sister continued reading. "I know what he's done. I know what he's capable of. But I see it in his eyes. He is afraid. And if a monster like him is afraid, then that means something far worse is coming." Their mother's legs gave out, and she sank onto an old trunk. "Dear God," she choked. Alina's voice was sharp. Who was she afraid of? Him or whoever was coming for us. Anaya flipped through the pages, her heartbeat hammering against her ribs as she found another entry, dated 16 years ago. "Tonight is the night. If I don't do this, they will never be safe. I must make him believe they are gone forever. I must bury the past. I must make sure no one ever finds them again." The lies that built their lives. The words felt like daggers, piercing through every belief they had ever held. Their grandmother hadn't just hidden them, she had erased them. "Do you see now?" Their mother's voice was brittle, breaking under the weight of realization. She wasn't just protecting you, she was making sure you could never be found. But why? Alina slammed the journal shut and turned on her mother. "You mean to tell me that you never suspected anything?" Her voice was sharp, laced with anger, with betrayal. Their mother flinched, shaking her head. "She told me you were abandoned, that she found you on the church steps." Her voice cracked. "I believed her. I never questioned it." Anaya's fingers curled around the journal, her knuckles white. "Because she made sure you wouldn't." The air grew colder, an eerie stillness creeping in through the attic walls. Something wasn't right. And then, a crash downstairs. An unwelcome visitor. The ghosts of the past return. All three of them froze. The sound had come from the living room, a deliberate, shattering noise. Someone was inside the house. Alina's pulse spiked, adrenaline surging through her veins. Anaya instinctively reached for her phone, but their mother snatched her wrist. Number, "Don't call the police yet." Alina gaped at her. "Are you serious? What if it's him?" Her mother's eyes darkened. "Then we need to know why he's here." Cautiously, they made their way downstairs, the weight of the past pressing on their shoulders. The living room was eerily dark, the only light flickering from a single candle on the fireplace mantel. The front door was ajar, swaying slightly in the wind. And there, in the center of the room, resting on the coffee table, was one of the grandmother's journals. But it wasn't the one they had been reading. It was one they had never seen before. Anaya reached for it with trembling fingers, flipping it open to the first page. Her eyes widened as she read the scrawled words. If you are reading this, then it means I have failed. It means they have found you. Her blood ran cold. Alina grabbed the book, flipping through the pages frantically. More entries, more warnings. You were never supposed to know the truth. I hid you to keep you safe, but they are coming. And this time, I may not be able to stop them. The final entry was a date from 16 years ago. He begged me to take you, but he knew he was being hunted. I didn't believe him, but now I do. If you ever find this, do not trust anyone. Not even those who claim to love you. The words echoed in Alina's mind, a cruel prophecy that had already begun unraveling. A sudden, sharp gust of wind blew through the open door, causing the candle to flicker violently. Then, a shadow moved on the porch. Anaya's breath hitched. Someone's still out there. Alina took a step forward, her fists clenched. But then, before she could reach the door, a voice. Low. Cold. Familiar. You should have never looked for answers. The world tilted. The truth was no longer something they could escape. They had been found, and the past was no longer willing to stay buried. The voice sent a chill down Alina's spine, freezing her in place. Anaya's breath hitched, and their mother's grip on her wrist tightened like a vice. Outside, beyond the dim glow of the porch light, a shadow stood motionless, its presence pressing against the fragile walls of their reality. You should have never looked for answers. The words weren't a threat. They were a verdict. For a moment, there was nothing but the pounding of Alina's heart, a slow, deafening rhythm as she squared her shoulders. Fear clawed at the edges of her mind, but she refused to let it take hold. Whoever this was, whatever this was, she would not back down. She took a step forward, her voice steady. Who are you? Silence. Then the shadow moved, stepping closer. The dim light revealed a man, tall, lean, his face partially obscured by the darkness. His presence was calculated, deliberate, like a predator watching its prey. But Alina was not prey. She stepped in front of her mother and sister, a barrier between them and the unknown. You came all this way, she continued, her voice strong, unwavering. So say whatever it is you came to say. The man tilted his head slightly as if assessing her. Then, in a voice hollow with old wounds, he said, I knew your father. The weight of those words hit like a landslide. Alina felt Anaya stiffen beside her. Their mother's grip faltered. He took another step forward, his boots crunching against the wooden porch. You were never supposed to be found. She was supposed to keep you hidden forever. Their grandmother. Alina's breath shuddered out of her lungs. Why? She demanded. What was she protecting us from? A beat of silence. Then, finally, the truth spilled free. Your father wasn't just running from the law, the man murmured. He was running from them, the people who wanted you dead. The world tilted. Anaya let out a strangled breath. What? The night he brought you to her, the man continued, he was being hunted. Not because of what he did, but because of what he took. His eyes locked onto Alina's, dark and knowing. You. A deep, crushing silence filled the air. Alina felt her stomach twist violently, the pieces of the puzzle clicking together in a way that made her want to scream. Their father had been involved with dangerous people, but it wasn't just him they wanted. It was them. Anaya's voice was barely a whisper. Who are you? For the first time, the man hesitated. Then, finally, he said, I was the one who was supposed to kill you. The words slammed into them like a hammer. Alina's breath faltered. Anaya took a step back. Their mother clutched her chest. The man looked at them, his gaze unreadable. 16 years ago, I was sent to make sure you never existed. His jaw clenched. But your father, he begged for your lives. He offered everything, and I... He exhaled sharply. I let him run. Alina's hands fisted at her sides. Why? For the first time, the man's expression softened, just slightly. Because he wasn't afraid to die, he murmured. He was only afraid for you. The air between them shifted, the weight of truth pressing against the years of deception. Anaya swallowed hard. So why are you here now? The man's gaze darkened. Because they know. Something cold swept through Alina's veins. They know you're alive, he continued. And this time, no one is going to let you run. A breathless silence followed, stretching between them like the thin line between past and present. Then, sirens in the distance. The man tensed, his body shifting instinctively toward the darkness. You need to leave, he said abruptly. Now. Their mother's voice cracked. Where? He turned toward the shadows. Anywhere but here. And just like that, he was gone. Alina felt something inside her crack open, something raw and untamed. This was bigger than them. Bigger than their grandmother's secrets. Their father had died protecting them. And now they would have to fight for their own survival. Anaya grabbed Alina's wrist, her voice shaking. What do we do? Alina turned to their mother, saw the years of pain and unspoken grief in her eyes. Then she looked at the house, the place where they had once felt safe. Not anymore. She squared her shoulders. We run. The wailing sirens grew louder, a piercing reminder that time was running out. Alina's heartbeat pounded in her ears, a drum of urgency that refused to slow down. Anaya's grip on her wrist was tight, her fingers cold with fear. Their mother, eyes wide with disbelief, stood frozen between them, torn between the home she had built and the past that had come crashing down around them. Mom, we have to go. Now. Alina's voice was firm, urgent, but beneath it was a tremor of something deeper. Something dangerously close to panic. Their mother hesitated for only a moment longer before nodding. Get in the car, she whispered. They didn't look back. Didn't dare to. The night air was thick with tension as they piled into the vehicle, the engine roaring to life beneath their mother's trembling hands. The headlights sliced through the darkness, illuminating a road that stretched into uncertainty. Where are we even going? Anaya asked, voice unsteady. Anywhere but here, Alina muttered, stealing a glance at the rearview mirror. And that was when she saw it, a black SUV barely visible in the distance. Headlights off, but unmistakable. They were being followed. Mom, Alina breathed, drive faster. Their mother pressed her foot against the gas pedal, the car jerking forward as the speedometer climbed. The once quiet streets of their neighborhood blurred past, streetlights flickering like dying stars. Then, the SUV's headlights snapped on. A silent confirmation. They weren't just being followed, they were being hunted. Anaya let out a shaky breath. They know. Alina clenched her fists. Then let's make sure they don't catch us. Her mother veered onto the highway, the city lights stretching like a ghostly trail behind them. The SUV followed, relentless, unwavering. A cold realization settled over them. There was no going back now. They weren't just running from their past anymore. They were running for their... The harrowing journey of Alina and Anaya is more than just a suspenseful tale. It is a powerful reflection of truth, identity, and the lengths we go to protect those we love. Their story teaches us that the past, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to surface. Secrets have a way of unraveling, and when they do, we are left with two choices: run from them or confront them head on. One of the biggest lessons is the power of truth. Their grandmother had spent a lifetime hiding them, believing secrecy was their greatest shield. But in the end, deception became a ticking time bomb, one that exploded with consequences beyond what she could control. This reminds us that while hiding from the truth may seem like protection, it often leads to even greater danger. Facing reality, no matter how painful, is the only way to take control of one's fate. At its core, the story is about family, not the one written in blood, but the one built through love and sacrifice. The twins' mother raised them as her own, proving that family is not about genetics, but about the people who stand beside us through every storm. It also highlights that sometimes those we trust the most may have secrets of their own, but that does not mean their love is any less real. Lastly, the twins' strength and resilience show that we are not defined by our past, but by how we choose to move forward. Despite the revelations and the danger chasing them, they refused to be victims. Instead, they became survivors, fighters. This teaches us that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to reclaim our destiny. Ultimately, truth, love, and resilience are the forces that shape us, and in the face of adversity, it is these values that will carry us through.